A little boy hugged his baby sister on a snowy Chicago sidewalk. A millionaire CEO was about to walk past until the boy said, "My sister's really cold." That one sentence changed all their lives forever. Snow fell over Chicago like a quiet verdict. The sky, pale and solemn, pressed low over the skyline, and the wind carried with it a sharp bite that sliced through even the thickest of coats. It was January. The kind of January that reminded people they were small. Outside the Chase Tower on South Clark Street, business people hurried, their footsteps lost in the crunch of snow beneath leather soles. Nobody looked up. Nobody slowed down. Ethan Caldwell was no different. At least, not yet. At 43, Ethan had long since earned his name in the upper echelons of Chicago's financial world. Founder of Caldwell Holdings, one of the city's most aggressive investment firms, Ethan lived by data, deals, and discipline. He had no time for sentiment. The world, he believed, did not run on feelings. It ran on execution. This morning he was already late for a board meeting on the 47th floor. His assistant had texted 3 times. A Japanese investment delegation had flown in overnight. There were projections to present, contracts to finalize, futures to predict. He never noticed the children at first. He was halfway up the concrete stairs when someone made him pause. It was a voice. Barely more than a whisper, yet it sliced through the wind like a scalpel. "My sister's really cold." He turned. At the base of the stairs, just under the overhang of the building, sat 2 children huddled against the wall. A boy, no older than 7, sat upright with his arms wrapped around a tiny girl who couldn't have been more than 4. Her face was pressed into his chest, her lips purple, her lashes rimmed with frost. The only thing separating their fragile bodies from the concrete was a paper-thin fleece blanket, frayed at the edges, sky blue and barely large enough to cover their shoulders. Ethan blinked. The boy met his gaze without flinching. Brown eyes, dark with exhaustion but startlingly steady. He didn't beg, didn't cry. He simply looked up and repeated, "My sister's really cold." For a long moment, Ethan stood frozen. His mind, so used to calculating value, risk, and return, couldn't categorize what he was seeing. This wasn't a statistic. This wasn't part of his algorithm. This was human. He stepped back down slowly. As he approached, he took in the boy's bare feet, red and cracked from the snow. The girl's pink cotton dress was stained and far too thin. She shivered uncontrollably in his arms. Neither child had gloves. Neither child had a coat. "What's your name?" Ethan asked quietly, crouching. The boy hesitated. "Liam." "And your sister?" "Sophie." Ethan reached out, his expensive leather gloves now removed, and touched Sophie's cheek. It was ice. Her skin gave under his fingers like thawing porcelain. She didn't even stir. "I'm taking you with me," he said, almost to himself. Liam didn't move, didn't argue. He only shifted slightly, enough to lift Sophie into Ethan's arms while still clutching the blue blanket. His own small body trembled, but he stood, on bare feet in the snow, and followed. Ethan didn't know where he was going, only that it wasn't to his meeting. The interior of his black SUV was warm and silent. Sophie lay cradled in his arms in the back seat as his driver peeled away from downtown toward Northwestern Memorial Hospital. "Tell them to call ahead," Ethan ordered, dialing his assistant. "Tell them to cancel everything." He didn't offer an explanation. The emergency room was a flurry of noise and fluorescent light. Nurses swept in as soon as he stepped through the sliding glass doors, alarm flashing across their faces as they saw Sophie. "She's hypothermic," one of them muttered. "Temp's dropping below 89. We need to warm her now." They took her from him gently but urgently, laying her on a gurney and wheeling her away. Liam followed until one of the staff gently held him back. "You can stay with me," Ethan said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I need to see her," Liam said. "I promised her I wouldn't leave." There was something in the boy's voice, fragile yet immovable. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Come on." They allowed Liam to sit on a chair beside Sophie's bed while the medical team worked around them. Ethan stood on the other side of the glass, still in his tailored coat, watching it all unfold as though he'd entered someone else's life. It didn't feel like him, yet it felt right. He had never married, never wanted children. His childhood in Joliet had been defined by chaos and poverty, a place he had escaped and never looked back on. Emotion to him had been a liability. But as he watched Liam reach out and tuck the edge of the blue blanket under Sophie's chin, something cracked inside his ribcage. A nurse approached. "She's stable now. We'll need to keep her overnight. The boy, Liam, is dehydrated and has mild frostbite on his toes, but he'll be fine." Ethan nodded. "Are you their father?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "No, I just found them." She nodded, not judging. "We'll contact social services." But Ethan was no longer listening. Through the glass, Sophie was beginning to stir. Her lips moved, and Liam leaned in, whispering something Ethan couldn't hear. But he saw the girl's hand reach for Liam's, and he saw Liam turn, just slightly, toward the window. Their eyes met again. Ethan Caldwell, a man who once defined success in net gain and quarterly margins, now found himself anchored not by numbers, but by something far heavier. A silent vow. He would not walk away. He would not forget this moment. He had stopped. And that changed everything. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and warmed plastic. Ethan sat by the window, coat draped over the arm of the chair, watching as the skyline outside began to vanish into a curtain of snow. Sophie lay tucked in a pediatric bed beside him, her body swaddled in heated blankets, a monitor tracing slow, steady lines across a pale screen. Liam hadn't moved from her side. The boy sat curled up on a stiff-backed chair, knees drawn to his chest, the sky-blue blanket wrapped tightly around his small frame. It was the only thing they'd brought with them. Not a toy, not a photo, not a scrap of paperwork, just that blanket. A social worker arrived just after dawn. She wore a heavy gray coat and the look of someone who had witnessed too many sad endings. Her name was Karen Delaney. She introduced herself to Ethan with practiced calm, clipboard in hand. "You found them where, exactly?" she asked. "Outside Chase Tower," Ethan replied. "They were sitting in the snow." "And you're not related to them in any way?" "No." She raised an eyebrow. "Then why bring them here yourself? Most people call emergency services." "They needed help," Ethan said. His tone was firm, final. Karen nodded slowly. "We'll run their names through the system. Do you know their last name?" Ethan turned to Liam. "Liam, do you remember your last name?" Liam didn't answer. He looked down at Sophie's hand in his. Karen crouched beside him, softening her voice. "Sweetheart, can you tell us your full name?" He shook his head. "That's okay," she said gently. "We'll figure it out." Ethan walked with her into the hallway. "They're traumatized," Karen said. "It's not unusual for names or timelines to be fuzzy. The girl's probably no older than 4. The boy's holding everything together by a thread." What happens next? Ethan asked. If there's no guardian or emergency contact found in the next 24 hours, they'll be placed into temporary foster care. Ethan's stomach turned. That's not acceptable. Karen glanced at him. You're welcome to apply for emergency guardianship, but that requires background checks, a home inspection, and— Do it, he said. Whatever's needed. I'll pay for everything. I have resources. I have space. She scribbled something on her clipboard. We'll start the paperwork, but understand, this is temporary. Ethan nodded, but his gut told him otherwise. Later that morning, a pediatrician named Dr. Hassan entered the room. He examined Sophie carefully, checking her vitals, lifting one eyelid with clinical precision. She's stable, he said, but she was dangerously close to slipping into hypothermia-induced coma. The boy's condition is improving. He's strong, protective. That's good. He paused, looking at Ethan. She must mean a great deal to him. Ethan nodded. She's all he has. When Dr. Hassan left, Ethan returned to the room, finding Liam now asleep in the chair, head resting against the mattress, fingers still linked with Sophie's. Ethan stood silently for a while, uncertain what to do with his hands, his thoughts, his heart. A nurse came in and whispered, You should get some rest. We can call you if anything changes. But Ethan shook his head. I'll stay. The hours passed in a haze of beeping monitors and hushed footsteps. Sophie stirred just before noon. Her lashes fluttered open, her mouth parting in confusion. She looked around and whimpered. Ethan leaned forward. You're safe. Your brother's right here. She turned to Liam, who still slept beside her. Then she looked at Ethan, unsure. Are you a doctor? He smiled softly. No, just someone who wants to help. She blinked slowly. You have a kind voice. The words struck him harder than he expected. I'm Ethan, he said. Do you want some water? She nodded. He poured it for her and held the cup as she sipped. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't spill. That night, when Karen returned with the first set of forms for emergency placement, Ethan signed without hesitation. His signature landed on the page with sharp, confident strokes. He's going to need you, Karen said before leaving. Not just the paperwork. Presence, stability, patience. Ethan looked through the glass again at the two children asleep in parallel, one in a hospital bed, one in a borrowed chair, and nodded. I'm not going anywhere, he said. He didn't know yet that the hardest part wasn't rescuing them. It would be learning how to stay. The black Lincoln Navigator pulled into the underground garage of the River North penthouse just after sunset. The snowstorm still whipped through the city like a ghost looking for a door, but down here, the world was still and warm. Ethan stepped out first and turned to help Liam, who clutched Sophie's hand with quiet panic. She wore the hospital's borrowed parka, too big and too stiff, the sleeves bunched up around her elbows. Liam had refused a change of clothes altogether. His eyes scanned every corner of the garage like he was preparing to run. It's just the elevator, Ethan said softly, as the doors slid open. Nothing scary. Sophie leaned into Ethan's coat, and Liam followed, always between her and everything else. The elevator opened into the penthouse directly, a 4,000-square-foot glass and steel marvel perched atop the skyline. Marble floors stretched endlessly in every direction. The furniture was elegant, minimal, expensive. The entire place was bathed in cold hues of black, gray, and chrome. It looked more like a showroom than a home. Sophie blinked at the vaulted ceiling. Liam didn't say a word. Ethan's voice was awkward. This is where I live. Sophie turned her face into Liam's shoulder. Liam stood rigid, his body language clear. We won't be here long. Ethan had never noticed how sterile it all was. The echo of his own footsteps, the untouched coffee table books, the rows of unopened wine. Now it was obvious. This was a space for power, not presence, and certainly not children. "I'll show you your room," he said. They followed him down the hallway to the guest suite. He opened the door to a room with twin beds pushed together, fresh sheets, and 2 new nightlights on the floor, hastily delivered by his assistant earlier that day. Liam immediately placed the blue blanket on one bed and helped Sophie climb up. She sat cross-legged, blinking at her surroundings as if waiting for them to vanish. "You don't have to unpack anything right now," Ethan said. Liam nodded but didn't move. "I'll make something to eat." In the kitchen, Ethan opened the refrigerator and frowned. He hadn't cooked in years. There were meal kits, wine, truffle cheese, a bottle of mineral water from Iceland. None of it made sense for 2 half-frozen children who hadn't eaten in days. He found a box of pasta and a jar of marinara tucked in the back of the pantry and set to work. Boiling water, setting out 3 plates. It was simple, clumsy even. Overcooked noodles, sauce straight from the jar, bread slightly burned from the toaster. When he called them in, Liam appeared first, holding Sophie's hand. She looked at the food, eyes wide. "It's warm," she whispered. Ethan looked up from pouring water. "Yes, not fancy, but warm." Sophie climbed into a chair and began to eat. Liam watched her carefully before taking a single bite himself. His posture was still tense, like at any moment the meal could be taken away. Ethan tried conversation. "Do you like red sauce?" Liam gave a tight nod. Sophie smiled. "It's better than crackers." "Crackers?" "That's what we used to eat when we didn't have a stove," she said simply, then went back to chewing. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. After dinner, he cleared the dishes and opened his tablet, pulling up a free children's book. It felt like something a parent might do. He offered it awkwardly. "Would you like a story?" Sophie lit up. Liam was hesitant, but he didn't protest. They sat on the couch. Sophie curled beside him, cheek resting against his sleeve. Ethan read slowly, pausing at each page, letting the silence fill the space between sentences. When he glanced up, Liam was on the floor, cross-legged, watching intently. When the story ended, Sophie was already asleep against his side. Ethan carried her gently to the guest bed and tucked her in. Liam stood nearby. "You don't have to stay," the boy said. "We'll be okay." "I know," Ethan replied, "but I want to." Liam said nothing. Ethan pulled a blanket from the closet and laid it across the empty armchair beside the bed. He stayed until both of them were asleep. At 3 a.m., Ethan stood at the window of his master bedroom, staring down at the winter-choked city. He'd canceled every meeting. The world outside kept turning, but he no longer felt tethered to it. Something fundamental had shifted. Something irreversible. He wasn't sure what would come next. Social services, legal forms, explanations to his board, but none of it mattered. Because a child had looked up at him and said, "My sister's really cold," and he had stopped walking. And now? Now he couldn't imagine going back. The snow had stopped falling by morning, but the sky remained the color of wet concrete. Sunlight filtered weakly through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the thin trails of steam rising from Ethan's freshly brewed coffee. He sat at the breakfast bar, still in a white t-shirt and sweatpants, an ensemble that, until now, had never existed in his wardrobe. Behind him, soft footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Liam appeared first, dressed in the same clothes from the day before. Sophie trailed behind him, her small hand gripping a corner of the blue blanket like it was her passport to safety. "Morning," Ethan said. Liam nodded. Sophie whispered, "Hi." "I made scrambled eggs," Ethan added, holding up a plate. "They might be fluffy." The children sat. Sophie ate with shy curiosity. Liam took smaller bites, still watching Ethan with careful calculation. After breakfast, Ethan showed them the guest bathroom, the soft towels, the stocked cabinet of new toothbrushes and soaps. Sophie grinned at a bubble bath bottle shaped like a dolphin. Liam just turned the faucet experimentally, as if checking to make sure the water wouldn't vanish. When they were settled, Ethan called his assistant. "Julie, I need clothes, shoes, toys, everything for a 7-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. Today. You know any pediatricians who make house calls?" Julie didn't miss a beat. "I'll send links and coordinate delivery." Later that day, while the children napped, Dr. Rachel Monroe arrived. Young, composed, with a soft Midwestern voice and a well-worn leather satchel, she greeted Ethan with the warmth of someone who had learned not to be alarmed by broken things. "Just observation for today," she said. "No pressure. We move at their pace." Ethan nodded. When the children woke, he introduced her as a friend who likes drawing and stories. Liam was wary, but Sophie, still groggy from sleep, curled into Rachel's lap without resistance. Rachel handed them both colored pencils and paper. Sophie drew a tall building, with 3 stick figures and a sun with too many rays. "That's me," she said, pointing to the smallest figure. "That's Liam. And that's the man who stayed." Rachel glanced at Ethan. Liam drew slowly, carefully, then flipped the paper over and drew something else. A door. Locked. With a shadow behind it. Rachel didn't comment, but she made a note. That night, after Rachel had left, Ethan sat at his desk while Liam played silently on the rug and Sophie hummed to herself nearby. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said, setting down his tablet. Liam looked up. "Do you want to go to school?" Liam's eyebrows knit. "We don't usually stay long enough." Ethan paused. "What if you stayed here?" Sophie perked up. "Here has pancakes." Ethan laughed. "That's true." He looked at Liam again. "I can enroll you. You'd have a desk and books and lunch that's not crackers." Liam considered. "Do we go together?" "You'd be in different classrooms, but the same school." Liam nodded slowly. "Okay, but she doesn't like loud noises." "We'll talk to the teachers," Ethan said. "Make sure she has quiet space." A silence passed. Then Liam asked, "Are we staying here?" Ethan answered truthfully, "I hope so." Later that night, Ethan stood outside their room. Through the half-open door, he saw Liam sleeping with one hand extended, touching Sophie's blanket. She, in turn, slept with her hand loosely wrapped around his wrist. He stepped back, closed the door softly, and stood in the hallway for a long time. The next morning, there was a surprise waiting. The walls of the hallway outside the guest suite had been transformed. Crayon drawings, dozens of them, taped in a jagged line that wrapped around the corner. Stick figures, rainbows, pancakes, stars. One showed a man standing between 2 children, all holding hands. Another had the penthouse drawn in shaky proportions with a heart above the window. Liam appeared beside him. Sophie wanted to decorate. Ethan knelt down. "She's a good artist. She says the blue blanket brought us here." Ethan swallowed hard. "I think she's right," he said. And in that moment, something long dormant in him stirred. The memory of warmth, of storybooks, of safety. A life he never knew he needed. He left the drawings on the wall. He left them there forever. It was a Tuesday when the world shifted again. The sky outside was unusually bright, the kind of cold winter morning where everything sparkled deceptively, like the city was holding its breath. Ethan was making pancakes, his third attempt since the children arrived, and marginally less disastrous than the first two. Sophie sat on the counter in an oversized apron, holding a plastic spoon and humming to herself, while Liam organized napkins at the table with surgeon-like precision. The knock at the door came like a crack of thunder. 3 firm raps against steel. Ethan froze, spatula midair. Sophie startled, looking to Liam, who instantly left the dining table and walked to her, protective as always. Ethan wiped his hands and opened the front door. 2 women stood outside, badges displayed. The older one, with silver hair pulled into a tight knot, introduced herself as Mary Ann Fletcher, senior caseworker with the Illinois Department of Child and Family Services. The younger, a woman with kind eyes and a digital tablet, was introduced as Dana Lee, junior investigator. "We're following up on an emergency guardianship case initiated last week," Fletcher said, her tone neutral but clipped. Ethan stepped aside. "Come in." They sat in the living room as Liam and Sophie quietly returned to their spots. Sophie clung to her stuffed bunny. Liam took her hand and kept his body half-shielded between her and the guests. "We've reviewed the hospital intake notes and your emergency foster paperwork," Fletcher began. "But yesterday, a new development came across our desk." Dana glanced at her tablet. "A kinship custody petition has been filed. A woman named Cynthia Blake is claiming she's the children's biological aunt on their father's side." Ethan stiffened. "She's requesting immediate placement," Dana added. "Under state law, biological relatives are given strong consideration, unless there's evidence of abuse, neglect, or danger." "She's not safe," Ethan said without hesitation. Fletcher raised a brow. "Do you have proof?" "I have testimony. From Liam." The boy flinched slightly at the sound of his name, but stood straighter. Sophie buried her face in his side. Ethan looked down at the caseworkers. "She had them after their mother died. CPS placed them there temporarily, and she hurt them." "Has that been documented?" Fletcher asked. "No," Ethan said, "because they ran, and no one followed." Dana typed quietly. "We'll need to speak to Liam directly, and we'll be interviewing Ms. Blake this afternoon." Liam turned to Ethan, his eyes sharp with old instincts. He didn't need translation. "I'll talk to them," he said flatly. "But not if Sophie's in the room." Sophie opened her mouth, but Liam gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay. Just wait here. I'll be back." They led Liam to the study. The door closed behind them. Ethan sat beside Sophie on the couch. She crawled into his lap, silent but trembling. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When the door reopened, Liam stepped out, pale but composed. Fletcher followed, her face unreadable. "We'll file a full report," she said, then paused. "Your home is clean, safe, structured. They've made visible progress here, but legal custody will be decided in court." "When?" Ethan asked. "Soon." They left with a polite nod. The door clicked shut. Sophie looked up. "Are we going away?" Ethan shook his head. "Not without a fight." That night, Ethan sat in his office with a glass of water and the children's drawings still pinned up behind his desk. He stared at a sketch Sophie had done the day before, 3 figures and a dog, all smiling under a roof. He picked up the phone. "Julie," he said, "get me a family law attorney, the best one we can find." "On it," she replied. The next day, Ethan met Joseph Brandt, a sharp, meticulous litigator known across the state for winning impossible custody battles. After hearing the details, Joseph gave a grim smile. She's got a biological tie, but if what the boy says is true, we can bury her in documentation. Therapy notes, school observations, doctor reports. But Liam's voice in court will matter the most. Ethan hesitated. I don't want to put him through that. Joseph shrugged. Sometimes children carry truths adults are too afraid to say. Outside the glass doors of the office, Liam was sitting quietly in the hallway, flipping through a picture book he couldn't quite read. Sophie leaned against his shoulder, half asleep. Ethan watched them for a long time before whispering to himself, I will not lose them. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, imposing, gray, and humming with the quiet intensity of a place where futures shifted with signatures. It was a week after the visit. A single sheet of paper had arrived in Ethan's mailbox, a summons for a preliminary custody hearing. The words were clinical, the language cold, but what it meant was this. Someone wanted to take Liam and Sophie away. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was different than Ethan expected. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was fluorescent lit, with tan walls, a stale carpet, and rows of benches that creaked when people shifted. There was no audience, no jury, just one judge, 2 attorneys, and 3 lives hanging in balance. Ethan sat beside Joseph Brandt, his jaw tight. Across the aisle sat Cynthia Blake. She was younger than Ethan had imagined, with bleached blonde hair pulled into a bun and too much lipstick. Her outfit was tailored to look conservative, navy dress, low heels, but her expression was brittle, defensive, rehearsed. Liam and Sophie sat in the hallway, accompanied by a court-appointed child advocate named Grace. She was soft-spoken and wore a scarf with cartoon animals on it. Sophie had clung to her immediately. Liam, less so. Judge Marilyn Rourke entered promptly at 10. She was in her 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. The kind of woman who had heard every story and stopped believing excuses decades ago. Joseph opened the hearing with quiet confidence. He laid out the timeline. Discovery on the street, medical intervention, emotional stabilization, documented improvement, therapy sessions, school readiness. Then came the moment Ethan dreaded. The judge looked up from the file. Mr. Caldwell, are you willing to testify to your intentions? Ethan stood, palms slightly damp. I didn't expect any of this, he said. I found 2 children who were freezing in the street, and I didn't walk away. Since then, they've become part of my life in a way I can't describe without reducing it. But I know this. They are safe with me. They are healing. And I won't abandon them. He sat down. The courtroom fell quiet. Then Cynthia took the stand. She spoke in soft tones, calling Liam and Sophie her sweet niece and nephew. She said she had been grieving her brother and overwhelmed, and hadn't known they were gone until someone from school had called her. She said she loved them dearly. But when the judge asked why no missing person report had ever been filed, her eyes darted. I didn't want to get the authorities involved, she said quickly. Kids wander. Joseph didn't interrupt. He waited. Then he calmly entered a stack of documents into evidence. Prior CPS visits to Cynthia's apartment. Noise complaints. Police logs. A letter from the children's pediatrician noting untreated bruises. Then came the final moment. Your Honor, Joseph said, Liam has asked to speak. Ethan looked at the boy sitting at the doorway. Liam stood slowly. The judge softened her tone. Come forward, Liam. You don't have to be afraid. Liam took the seat, legs swinging above the floor. I don't want to live with her, he said simply. She hit Sophie when she cried, locked us in closets, said if we told anyone we'd be taken away forever. He paused. But Mr. Ethan didn't take us away. He stayed. He made pancakes. He bought Sophie a nightlight so she wouldn't be scared. He glanced at the judge. Can we stay? Sophie peeked around the doorframe, her small face pale. Liam stretched out his hand and she ran to him, wrapping her arms around his side. Judge Rourke cleared her throat. Her voice was quiet, but resolute. This court finds compelling evidence of neglect in the care of Ms. Blake and clear indication of safe, nurturing progress under Mr. Caldwell's temporary guardianship. Emergency custody is hereby extended, pending a final review. Full hearing in 30 days. Gavel. Done. But everything had changed. Outside, snow began to fall again. Ethan walked the children to the car, his coat draped over both their shoulders. In the back seat, Sophie whispered, "Do we get to go home now?" He nodded. "Yes. We're going home." That night, Liam said something he'd never said before. "Can you read us a story?" Ethan did. And when they fell asleep under the blue blanket, he sat beside them, knowing this wasn't temporary anymore. It was the beginning of forever. 2 days after the hearing, Liam stood in front of the entrance to Lincoln Elementary School in downtown Chicago. He clutched his backpack tightly, his knuckles pale. Beside him, Sophie wore a lavender puffer jacket and a tiny pair of earmuffs that made her look like a snowflake with legs. Ethan knelt between them. "Just try your best. That's all. I'll be right here after school." Liam didn't answer. Sophie nodded, but then leaned close and whispered, "Don't let the snow melt without us." Ethan chuckled. "I promise." He watched them disappear into the school with the help of Miss Karen, the counselor Julie had recommended. She was warm, a little scatterbrained, and greeted them like they were the only 2 children in the world. Back in the penthouse, Ethan sat alone in the silence. The walls felt empty without crayon drawings, the air too still without Sophie's constant hum or Liam's careful footsteps. He poured himself coffee but left it untouched. At noon, his phone rang. It was Julie. "Just a heads up. Your board meeting starts in 10 minutes. "I'm not coming in," Ethan replied. Pause. "You okay?" "I need to be here. For them." Julie understood. "I'll push the quarterly brief and let legal know." That afternoon, Ethan waited outside the school 20 minutes early. He stood under a bare tree, his coat buttoned, hands stuffed in his pockets. When the children emerged, Liam walked straight to him, his face unreadable. Sophie ran, arms wide. "I got a sticker," she shouted, "for sharing my markers." Ethan scooped her up. "I'm proud of you." Liam handed him a folded paper. "My teacher says I'm behind in reading, but I'm good at numbers." Ethan opened the sheet. Liam had completed every math problem, correctly. He blinked. "Liam, these are 5th grade equations." "I like patterns," Liam said, then shrugged like it was nothing. That night, Ethan stayed up reviewing education specialists. Julie sent him names, credentials, locations. One stood out, Dr. Evelyn Harper, a gifted education consultant with a soft approach and a background in trauma-informed learning. He called her. She answered after one ring. "Mr. Caldwell?" she said, her voice textured like a lullaby. "I've been expecting your call." Three days later, Dr. Harper visited the penthouse. She arrived with puzzles, storybooks, and 2 trays of Play-Doh. "Assessment disguised as play," she whispered, kneeling next to Liam. "Shall we build a spaceship?" Liam tilted his head. "Space doesn't have sound." "You're right," she smiled. "But imagination does." For an hour, she observed. Sophie built a kingdom of yellow ducks and rainbows. Liam designed a solar system using only blue and gray. When she and Ethan spoke privately, her tone shifted. He's brilliant, not just smart, systemically gifted, and also deeply guarded. Can he catch up? Ethan asked. He'll leap forward once he feels fully safe. It's not a race, it's an invitation. Ethan absorbed every word. Weeks passed. Each morning brought new routines. Sophie learned to read three-letter words. Liam organized the pantry by item category and expiration date. Ethan, once a man who had a driver for everything, now relished walking them to school with gloved hands in his. One Friday evening, they returned home to find a surprise. Ethan had turned the dining room into an art gallery. Every drawing the children had made now hung in frames. Soft lights shimmered across the sketches. Sophie gasped. Is this a museum? Ethan smiled. It's your museum. Liam blinked fast. Why? Because what you make matters, Ethan said. And because every home deserves its own masterpieces. Liam nodded slowly and for the first time leaned into Ethan's side without being asked. That night, Sophie whispered as she fell asleep, We didn't let the snow melt without us. And Ethan, in the silence, smiled. No, sweetheart, we didn't. Spring in Chicago arrived like a secret, quiet, hesitant, with mornings that still needed scarves. But the light changed, just enough. And with it came something Ethan hadn't felt in years. Steadiness. The children were thriving. Sophie's drawings grew more complex, full of swirling shapes and impossible creatures. Liam had begun tutoring another student in math after school, at his teacher's insistence. Ethan started cooking dinners without recipes and, once a week, let Sophie choose the music they danced to after the dishes were clean. Everything was beginning to feel, dare he say it, normal. Until the accident. It happened on a Thursday. They were at the park, one of those rare afternoons when Ethan didn't take a single work call. Sophie was on the swings. Liam had climbed to the top of the jungle gym. Ethan turned away for just a moment to adjust Sophie's jacket. And then he heard it. The sound of a sharp thud. And the scream. He looked up and saw Liam sprawled beneath the jungle gym, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Sophie's face crumpled into silent panic. Liam! Ethan was beside him in seconds. Liam was conscious, but pale, his breath shallow. It hurts, he whispered. Ethan called 911. The paramedics came fast. Ethan rode with Liam in the ambulance while Sophie gripped his coat in the back seat, her voice tiny and trembling. Is he gonna die? No, baby. He's strong. He's going to be okay. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the X-ray showed a fractured femur. Liam would need pins, surgery, weeks in a wheelchair. The doctor, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Ellis, looked at Ethan carefully. He'll recover, but it's going to be hard on him. Pain, physical therapy, emotional regression, especially considering his history. Ethan nodded. Do whatever it takes. When Liam woke after surgery, Ethan was still by his side. Sophie curled asleep at the foot of the hospital bed, wrapped in the blue blanket Ethan had brought from home. Liam's voice was hoarse. I fell. You climbed too high, Ethan whispered. It's okay. You're going to heal. But I was trying to show you something, Liam said. What? That I'm brave. Ethan's chest tightened. You already are, he said. You don't have to prove it. The next few weeks were rough. Liam struggled with the pain, the immobility, the sudden loss of control. He refused to eat for days. He snapped at Sophie. He cried in silence. Ethan brought in Dr. Harper again. She spoke to Liam gently, helping him draw his fears in color and name them without shame. "He's terrified he'll be seen as weak," she told Ethan, "that now you'll see him differently." "I don't," Ethan said. "Then tell him, every day, until he believes you." And so Ethan did. He carried Liam to the living room and set up a blanket fort with lights. He played board games, even when Liam refused to answer. He showed up at every therapy session. He turned Sophie's daily giggles into small rituals of joy, letting her decorate Liam's wheelchair with glow-in-the-dark stars. One night, as Liam watched Sophie sleep beside him, he whispered, "Do you think he'll still want us if we're broken?" Ethan heard from the hallway. He walked in, knelt beside Liam, and said, "There is nothing in this world that could make me not want you." Liam blinked. "Even if I fall again?" "Especially then." Liam didn't cry, but for the first time since the accident, he nodded. By the time spring truly arrived, soft green buds on the trees, bird song returning to the park, Liam had begun to walk again, slowly, with help. Sophie cheered at every step, and one morning, as the three of them stood in the elevator heading down to school, Liam reached for Ethan's hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. It was the strongest step he'd ever taken. Liam had returned to school. He limped slightly, but he held his head high. Sophie was back to cartwheeling through the hallways and taping her drawings to every vertical surface in the penthouse. But Ethan knew they were nearing a new edge. The 30-day hearing loomed. The outcome would decide everything. One quiet Sunday afternoon, while Sophie napped and Liam quietly built towers from dominoes, Ethan sat at the kitchen island with a stack of papers and a pen. Joseph had told him to prepare a personal statement for the court. Something honest. Something from the heart. He tried to start a dozen times. "My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I—" He scratched it out. "To whom it may concern." No, that wasn't it. Then his eyes fell on something Sophie had left on the counter, a piece of pink construction paper with 3 words in shaky crayon. "Don't let go." That was the beginning. Ethan wasn't the only one writing. In his room, Liam sat at his desk with a pencil and an envelope. He stared at the blank page for a long time before finally scribbling, then erasing, then writing again. He folded the letter, addressed it, and hid it under his mattress. It read, "Dear Dad, you weren't nice, but I still think about you. I hope you are better now. I don't hate you, but I'm not coming back. I have a new dad now. He doesn't yell. He stayed. Liam." In the next room, Sophie was drawing again. But instead of rainbows or stars, she had drawn 3 people holding hands, standing in front of a tall building labeled Court. Above it, in careful letters, Our Family. The night before the hearing, Ethan tucked Sophie into bed while Liam read silently beside her. Sophie looked up. "Will they take us?" Ethan brushed a hand across her hair. "I won't let that happen." "But you don't get to choose," Liam said quietly. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. "No, but I get to fight." "And if they say no, then I fight harder." Liam hesitated, then reached under his pillow and handed Ethan the letter. "This is for the judge." Ethan opened it. Read, His throat tightened. I'll make sure she reads it. That night, Ethan sat in the blue room, the one that used to be empty, cold, without meaning. Now it was filled with drawings, books, warmth. He lit a candle, opened his laptop, and wrote until the sun rose. He didn't write like a CEO, not like a billionaire, not like a man used to winning. He wrote like a father. I used to believe I could fix things with money. That protection meant giving people everything they needed, as long as it didn't ask anything of me. But then I met two children who needed something I didn't know how to give. And I tried anyway. Not perfectly, but fully. I've built companies, solved problems, created jobs. But this is the first thing I've ever built with my heart. When he finished, he printed 2 copies, one for the judge and one for Liam. Because some letters weren't meant to be sent. They were meant to be kept. The morning of the hearing, Ethan stood in front of the mirror and adjusted his tie. He wasn't dressing for court. He was dressing for them. Sophie emerged from her room in a blue dress. Liam in a collared shirt, still favoring his healing leg. "Ready?" Ethan asked. Sophie nodded. Liam looked up. "Did you bring the letter?" Ethan tapped his coat pocket. "I never let go." The courtroom was different this time. Not in appearance. It was still small, fluorescent, and quiet, but in atmosphere. Ethan could feel it the moment they entered. There was weight in the air, but not dread. More like reverence. Judge Rourke was already seated, glasses low on her nose, reading a file thickened by reports, letters, evaluations. One of them, the one Ethan had written, sat atop the stack. Sophie clutched his hand tightly. Liam stood straighter this time, steady despite the faint limp. He had insisted on walking into the courtroom himself. Joseph Brandt gave Ethan a brief nod before addressing the court. "Your Honor, we submit final evidence of Mr. Caldwell's guardianship, the education reports, psychological assessments, medical documentation, and letters from both children expressing their desire to remain with him." Letters from both children. Judge Rourke looked up. Joseph stepped back. "Yes, Your Honor. One is written. One is a drawing." He handed Sophie's picture to the clerk. Judge Rourke studied it for a long moment. 3 stick figures, a building labeled court, and one sentence, "Our family." She looked at Sophie. "Did you draw this?" Sophie nodded. "And who are these people?" "That's me and Liam and Mr. Ethan. But really, he's Dad now." Silence swept the courtroom. The judge smiled, just barely. She then turned to Liam. "Do you want to speak again, young man?" Liam stepped forward, unfolded his letter. "I already wrote it," he said. "But I'll say it too. Mr. Ethan didn't just take us in. He made us feel like we mattered, even when I broke my leg, even when I yelled. He stayed." His voice caught. "He always stays." Ethan didn't move, but inside something broke and healed at once. The judge folded her hands. "This court has reviewed the full body of evidence, and what I see before me isn't a custody case." She paused. "It's the story of a man who didn't choose children out of obligation but out of love, and 2 children who rose from tragedy with strength and dignity. Permanent guardianship is hereby granted to Mr. Ethan Caldwell, effective immediately." Sophie clapped. Liam exhaled, a breath long held. Ethan closed his eyes. Not relief. Home. That evening, Ethan stood at the penthouse window. The city below glimmered like stardust. Behind him, laughter echoed through the hall. He turned. Sophie was running in socked feet, trailing a blanket behind her like a cape. Liam was trying to balance a spoon on his nose. Music played softly from the living room. Ethan stepped into the room. "Dinner's ready," he said. "What are we having?" Sophie asked, bouncing. "Mac and cheese. The real kind, not from a box." Liam grinned. "With breadcrumbs on top?" "You bet." They gathered around the table. No formality, just warmth. Sophie raised her plastic cup of juice. "A toast," she declared. "To our forever." They clinked. Juice, laughter, light. Later that night, as Ethan tucked them in, Sophie pulled out the old blue blanket, the same one from their first night. "It's still our lucky one," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "It always will be." She smiled sleepily. "You never let go." He brushed her hair back. "I never will." As the children drifted off to sleep, Ethan sat at their bedside watching their slow, peaceful breaths. And he knew this was the legacy he wanted. Not a name on a tower, not a billion-dollar valuation, but a promise, soft, quiet, and wrapped in a blue blanket. Forever.